Darwin, Einstein, Newton, Moses. All of these people have ideas published about the way things work. And somehow, over the course of time, those ideas have been divided into, well, faith-based ideas and science. And I think there's something wrong with that. So today, we're talking with a PhD in neurobiology about the way God's creation works on this edition of Living Your Faith.
I think for me as a brain scientist, I must be a lot like many of my friends over in the physics and astronomy department who study astronomy and the universe. They, like me, already believe that this is God's world. And then they look at it. They look at the universe through telescopes, and then they run out of words. I mean, you need a poet to describe the universe. Now we're talking about the human brain. It's not that big. I mean, it's this big. Put your two fists together, and you've got roughly how big your brain is. It's not that big. But we run out of words trying to explain how complex it is and the things that it can do, how millisecond by millisecond it changes, how it can do massively parallel processing. Computer scientists love to talk like that, right? It can do a million things at once. Consciously, we can't possibly do that, but our brains are taking care of this stuff while we're doing the important work. They're, doing all the housekeeping, but millions of things at once. We would run out of words to describe our wonder that even one of these things could have come to be, rather than every day, right? Humans grow brains. Babies are born, they have brains, and 6 billion of us or so on the planet have these things, and we can do all this stuff. And so to me, how does it affect how I see the world as a Christian? Well, I already think that it's God's world, and now I look at that and say, okay, that's amazing. So that guitar player, he's creating music by plucking his fingers on strings. Those vibrating strings are vibrating the air, and those vibrations are impacting the musician's ear, vibrating his tympanic membrane. Those vibrations get amplified in his ear through the action of some interesting bones in the ear that maybe you've heard of, hammer, anvil, and stirrups. So they amplify that vibration, and then they send that vibration through a structure inside his ear called the cochlea. What happens is those vibrations, as they go through his cochlea, they move hairs back and forth that are attached to cells. As those hairs move back and forth, they cause electrical changes in those cells. Those electrical impulses are being passed on, these axons, to their first stop, which is in the thalamus, a part deep in the brain where a certain amount of processing happens. And then they're passed to what's called the auditory cortex. And apparently what happens is the auditory cortex has privileged access to the motor cortex. In other words, hearing and movement are very closely tied together in the human brain. Some cells called mirror neurons, these are really interesting cells. They respond both to what they expect something to be and what it actually is. And it's probably those mirror neurons that are helping this musician match what he's hearing to what he thought he should be hearing, and therefore to what he ought to be doing. And somehow they're involved in him making these tiny, imperceptible adjustments as he goes with his guitar to make it sound the way he wants it to sound. It's not the fact that we don't understand things that makes them so amazing. I still think that it's reasonable when a baby is born to say, oh my gosh, it's a miracle. People do that all the time. Do they really mean that no human will ever understand how babies develop? I don't think they mean that. I think they mean, I don't care that scientists can explain it. That just makes it cooler. All evolutionary theory is, to me, is an explanation for a whole bunch of things that we have observed. Fossils buried in rocks, DNA similarities between organisms of various kinds, interesting, weird developmental quirks that different organisms share with each other, the distribution of where organisms and their fossils are around the world. Put all those things together, someone comes up with an explanation that goes something like this. Organisms are all related to each other, and they've been developing over a very long time. Shazam, there's evolutionary theory. If that is thought to negate God's action, then that's a very serious misunderstanding of what the Bible says about God's action in the world. The Bible claims everything that happens in the world is God's action.